Let's talk about the trad wife trend that we've been seeing all over our social media feeds. Okay, so the term trad wife is short for traditional wife and refers to socially conservative influencers, often young women, who celebrate looking after their husbands, children's, and homes in content on platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. More than that, personalities like Nara Smith and Hannah Nealman of Ballerina Farm have taken it a step further and created this very stylized content around domestic activities that's pleasant and honestly comforting to watch. Think like cooking recipes from scratch and childcare and picking fresh herbs from their garden. It's all very soft living and glamorized, showing wifely devotion to the role of a homemaker in a very 1950s polished way, but, make it modern. And as enticing as a tradwife fantasy might appear on the surface, it does raise some questions like, oh, wait a second, haven't women worked really, really hard to carve out career paths where we're respected and we've been grinding and sacrificing for a spot on the C suite? Doesn't glamorizing this type of style set us back in a time where we as a gender fought so hard to get away from? There may be some serious issues lurking behind those perfectly iced cupcakes and spotless floors, but there's also more than meets the eye in that this trend might actually be rewriting the rules of modern feminism. I'll let you be the judge. The tradwife trend, has it gone too far? Let's talk about it. Cue the intro.
Hey there, I'm Melody Bose, your host of Jeans with a Blazer, a podcast about rewriting the rules of work and life.
I'm going to talk about some of the creators like Hannah Nealman and Nara Smith and some of the other creators in this space. But I really want to first get into how the tradwife trend came to be and look at why it has such a chokehold on mainstream media. And also, I want to look at some of the things that kind of make it problematic. All right, so the tradwife trend, where did it come from? It seems like it just kind of popped out of nowhere, but plot twist, it did not. There are some culturally significant things that happened to give this trend a certain momentum. So it's really, really important to know that this trend really surged in the early 2020s, notably during COVID-19, the pandemic, aka the end of the world as we all knew it. And that's when home life became central and comforting domestic content found a captive audience because honestly, well, we didn't really have any other choice, but home content was all we had, frankly. I don't know about you all, but I feel like 2020 is something that we've never really fully recovered from. It's a weird time that made people realize a lot of things. So some people were over their jobs as a whole and just left the corporate working world entirely, while others, including myself, were either let go or furloughed from their jobs for a period of time and left wondering, what the heck do we do now? I personally made more variations of banana bread than I thought possible and learned that you could fill an entire watermelon with vodka and make a refreshing, boozy summer drink. Thank you, COVID-19. Anyway, okay, this is issue number one, the backlash against mainstream feminism. So the tradwife movement didn't just arise in the vacuum that was COVID-19, although we would like to blame it for a lot of things. It's also largely a reaction to mainstream methods of women's empowerment that's been brewing over time, and COVID just seemed to be the tripwire that kind of kicked it off. Here's what I mean. For decades, women have been told to lean in, build careers, be a girl boss, and juggle it all. And while these messages encouraged women to break glass ceilings, they sometimes downplayed the very real stress and burnout many women face in trying to have it all. We've heard that trope. It's not fun. And it's honestly not so much a trope as much as it is an expectation. And there's almost this internalized competition that we have to, can we have the career? Can we have the family? Can we make our house look Pinterest perfect, right? The problem with this is there's still a lack of structural support for working mothers. For example, in the US, there's really no national paid maternity leave for the most part for now, and often really unaffordable childcare. The result is sometimes women feel disillusioned and exhausted by the pressures of modern womanhood. The tradwife trend capitalizes on this, portraying a simpler solution. Just retreat to the home. It's nice. It's cozy. It's framed as a conservative, very individual answer to societal failures. Wouldn't it be nice if you could choose to live on one income and focus on family? This is a false choice for most women. In reality, quitting the workforce isn't feasible for many families, and not every woman wants to abandon her career. In fact, almost 80% of women aged 25 to 54 are now in the US workforce. And surveys show that the majority of women desire some form of work or financial independence. So, the tradwife movement is, in part, a backlash to a genuine issue, which is lack of support and flexibility for women, but it swings to the opposite extreme rather than addressing the root of the problem. It essentially says if work life balance is hard, just go back home, babe. Just do that. So that solution may feel personally validating to some, but it doesn't fix the systemic issues that make balancing work and family so challenging. So I am not a wife yet or a mother yet, but I did grow up watching my mom play the role of mom and dad for a while, and I saw how she was doing her best to take care of the home and have a full-time career and take care of me and be a good friend, a good sister, all of the things. The truth is, having a job and working is hard. Having a family and being that maternal figure is hard. It's unrealistic that we would expect someone to be able to have it all. So instead of the tradwife solution being personally validating, it sidesteps these issues and it risks undoing the hard won progress by suggesting a woman's place is naturally in the home. Next issue, idealizing a past that wasn't so ideal. So, okay, nostalgia plays a really big role here with the tradwife aesthetic because it often romanticizes a mid 20th century vision of domestic bliss. In many videos and images, women wear vintage inspired clothing like dresses and aprons and don't mind getting their hands dirty with the housework and appear perfectly content serving their families, baking bread from scratch and dressing up and, wearing beautiful jewelry. And that kind of imagery taps into this yearning for a simpler time when roles were clearly identified. Okay, that is something that our modern Western world has created a lot of gray area around. We live in an era where stay at home dads and husbands are a thing, and women are out earning their male counterparts more and more. So, while we can argue that women still have a long way to go, and even further for women in other countries that still have so few rights, the societies that have been privileged to progress have led to women having more options and rights than we did in, say, the 1950s. Tradwife influencers relentlessly romanticize the 1950s and sometimes much earlier eras, painting them as the golden age for family life. The glaring problem with that is the past that they glorify had kind of a dark side for women if we could just go back in time for a minute. So, yes, a mid-century middle-class housewife might have had a shiny kitchen and obedient kids on TV, very like sitcom-esque, but she also lived in a time before women had many fundamental rights and opportunities. For instance, in the 1950s and earlier, women in many Western countries could not get credit cards or bank loans without a husband's signature. Like, women in the US didn't get the ability to have their own credit card by the 1970s. Guys, that was like 50 years ago. That's not that long ago. And in addition to that, birth control was not widely accessible. In some even darker cases, women were trapped in marriages because divorce was stigmatized and they lacked their own income. So imagine how difficult this might be for a woman who is a wife at home and she has that perfect dream life that, these tradwife influencers aspire for. And she doesn't have her own source of income, so she can't leave if she wanted to. She'd be shamed by maybe her family, her neighborhood, her community. It's just not really realistic. So if she wasn't happy, she would have to put on this happy face and, go about her day. And she didn't really have any other choice. So what do you do in that situation? You deal with it. What this also makes me think about is Betty or Betsy, Betty. I think it's Betty in Mad Men, and how she was like that perfect housewife. And then slowly, I won't give any spoilers away, but slowly as the season unravels, you see just her kind of like facing this identity crisis and going through things like infidelity with her husband. And I think that paints a really interesting picture of what that kind of life looked like during that time. And it was not always great. And that's the thing, is this historical reality is conveniently glossed over in tradwife content. As historian Stephanie Coontz points out, none of these tradwife influencers would seriously want to go back to this harmful period. What they really cherry pick is the economic stability of that era when one income could support a family and a woman who didn't want to work out of the home could afford not to. But Coontz notes that the nuclear family, the breadwinner model of the 1950s, was an aberration made possible by very unique post-war conditions like government housing subsidies and a booming economy. And that benefited mainly white families, and it is far from a timeless norm. Aspirational, sure, but realistic? Not so much. So you could say that tradwife influencers misrepresent what they're doing as simply going back to tradition, when in fact the specific ideal they imitate, the carefree suburban housewife with a spotless home and doting husband, that was accessible to only a very small slice of women in a very narrow time window. The danger of idealizing that past is that it glosses over the lack of rights and agency women had. You could see it as something that sets women back by promoting an aesthetic of the past without also acknowledging the oppression that came with it. What do you guys think? Next issue, the anti-feminism and extreme ideology that's hiding under the frosting. Okay, so many tradwife influencers frame their lifestyle as just a personal choice. Quote, I just prefer being a homemaker. But scratch the surface and you'll often find a strident rejection of modern feminism and equality, sometimes veering into some kind of extremist views. So, a viral TikTok made by one tradwife creator, Gwen, known as Gwen the Milkmaid, had overlaid text asking, is it just me, or are most women today completely blind to the fact that the promiscuous lifestyle, corn, multiple partners, the birth control pill, premarital you know what, and everything else the world glorifies today is actually destroying us? Interesting. She urges women to protect femininity the way God created it to be, implying that feminism and sexual liberation have led women astray. Similarly, many tradwife content snippets carry an underlying message. Women's pursuit of careers and independence is the root of society's ills, and the only truly feminine and fulfilling path is to submit to a husband and care for kids. Imagine someone telling you that was the only way. That was the reality for so many women, and still in other societies and other cultures. So one article summarized it bluntly. The main message behind the tradwife movement is that women should be submissive to their husbands, that the 9-to-5 jobs are not for women, and that the most fulfilling role a woman can have is in the kitchen. That goes far beyond a very benign personal reference. It's actively pushing a doctrine that women belong in a subordinate domestic role. What do you guys think about that? So as I'm saying all this stuff, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Either slide into my DMs at Jeans with the Blazer or Mel Bose, my personal Instagram, or leave a comment wherever you're watching this, if you're on the YouTubes, whatever. I'm curious to see what you think. All right, so this is why critics say that the tradwife trend has a dark heart despite its very sugary aesthetic presentation. It's reinforcing the notion that a woman's place is only in the home, and that the feminist movement, which, FYI, fought for women's education, voting rights, work opportunities, bodily autonomy, and legal equality, was a mistake. Now, that is a huge step back. It essentially urges young women to relinquish the very rights that earlier generations fought so hard for. That's just one perspective, okay? Next issue, social media versus reality and the performance of perfection. Okay, so now we're moving from a lifestyle choice to a performance. Let's just let that marinate for just a second as I continue. Another problem is that tradwife influencers can set very unrealistic expectations that real women might struggle to meet. These TikTok and Instagram wives they're beautifully staged videos, okay? Immaculate kitchens, like dream goals kitchens, right? Kids in matching outfits and elaborate home cooked meals just, pulled off just effortlessly with ease. But remember, it's kind of their job to look perfect. In fact, being a tradwife influencer is literally a job, albeit one that might contradict the I don't work message. Here's the reality. Many so-called tradwives do earn money, often via influencing, sponsorships, or home-based businesses, such as selling cookbooks or courses on homemaking. Their simple life is actually just a very carefully curated media product. I'll give you an example. This helps explain how Hannah Nealman of Ballerina Farm can film these, very beautiful, serene videos of milking cows and baking with her eight 8 children. Okay. She's essentially turning her lifestyle into content, likely with behind the scenes help. Now, Nara Smith, the golden tradwife of TikTok. She can appear in a silky slip dress, making her husband's favorite candy bars from scratch, because what you don't see on camera is the nannies, the relatives, or just the sheer effort it takes to set up those shots. Okay. It took me half an hour, almost 40 minutes to set up this podcast because I have like ring lights going on and 2 cameras, and there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes. That takes time, guys, and skill. Somewhat. And that's just to set up a podcast where I yap for 30 minutes as I'm doing now. I'm literally not doing anything else. I'm not touching any ingredients. I'm not cleaning anything. I'm literally just talking. So think about that from a greater scale for more content, and then creating that content as just a part of your everyday job. So for an average woman at home with limited resources, trying to live up to this Instagram perfect ideal could be a recipe for anxiety and also inadequacy. Hello, imposter syndrome. Welcome back. Also, Nara Smith. Before she was married to model Lucky Blue Smith, she was a moderately successful model herself. She was discovered by IMG at the age of 14 and did a bit of traveling around the world doing modeling. It's important to note that a substantial part of her network, it's not confirmed, we don't know if she has family money or whatever, but it can be theorized that a substantial part of her net worth can be attributed to her work as an influencer and social media personality when she really started taking off on TikTok in 2023 for her recipe videos. So she essentially and very successfully made the idea of not having a career to be a stay-at-home wife and mother a very successful career. So her and Lucky, they bought a $1.3 million home. And I think it would be naive to think that, he paid for everything and, because tradwives don't split the bill or pay for anything. But let's be realistic, guys. She probably paid for a good slice of that home. And to be crystal clear, I am not hating on any of this woman, okay? Get your bag, girl, do your thing. What they're doing is actually pretty genius. And if you've ever seen a Nara Smith video, it's like, it is chef's kiss storytelling, but also hilariously unrealistic. It's like, my children were craving macaroni and cheese for lunch, so I hand rolled each elbow pasta from scratch and made the cheese from soybeans from my garden and nutritional yeast. She talks in this very soothing, very almost ASMR-esque voice. But guys, she is 100% in on the joke. Like, obviously, her kids aren't starving, waiting for her to make 500 pieces of elbow pasta by hand. But the narrative is just, that's part of the story. That's a vehicle that keeps it going through the story and just the overall aesthetic, right? She has to give background. Her kids are hungry, so that's why she's making this delicious meal with this beautiful presentation for you. It's less about the every woman can live this way idea and more about watching a lifestyle that feels like aspirational fantasy content. Now, another interesting thing is that tradwife influencers also rarely show the messy realities. I'm talking like the toddler tantrums, the boredom that can come with endless house chores, the financial codependence tensions that they have with their husbands. Consuming too much of this content can make women feel like they're failing if their home life isn't as perfect or if they don't derive a constant bliss from cleaning ovens and folding laundry. I remember when Pinterest came out and if my room didn't look like this Pinterest perfect room with the perfect color scheme and all the little details, I felt like I was lacking. So I can only imagine what that feels for, a traditional wife in that role. Also, who likes folding laundry? Who has no chores that they have that they don't want to do, but they know they must do them or else your home would be a total mess? I don't know. But anyway, it's a social media mirage that can breed self-doubt. Next issue, privilege and exclusion. Okay, so it's worth noting that the tradwife fantasy is one also largely afforded by privilege. Historically, if we go back in time here, only families with a certain level of income or wealth could afford to have a full-time homemaker. Many of today's tradwife icons themselves come from very comfortable backgrounds. For example, Hannah Nealman of Ballerina Farm and her husband are actually quite well off. Her husband's family has significant inherited wealth, meaning his father, so her husband's father, co-founded an entire airline. So they're good. That financial cushion makes the pastoral homesteading dream viable. When tradwives say any woman can do it if she budgets well, right? That tale as old as time, don't get iced coffee and you'll be able to have a home. I guess it's the same concept here. Well, by that, they're omitting the safety nets and assets that often prop up their lifestyle. And with all these issues, it becomes clear that the tradwife trend isn't a harmless vintage dress-up game as it might seem. It has significant implications for women's progress and our culture's view of gender roles. The solution it presents, which in some cases just be a submissive homemaker and everything will be lovely and dreamy fairy tales and you'll be dressed by birds every day, that's overly simplistic and frankly regressive when taken as a general prescription for society. Now, on to the golden question. Does it set women back? Stay with me here. In some ways, yes, if uncritically adopted. It does encourage young women to surrender to autonomy, limit their horizons, and accept a subordinate status in the name of tradition. Tradwife, right? However, come on guys, that would be way too simple. The story does not end there. The very emergence of this trend also highlights legitimate discontent that we shouldn't ignore. This leads us to think, is there a way to address the valid desires and frustrations driving women toward the tradwife ideal without throwing equality out the window? That's where a more nuanced solution comes in. Okay, so here is where I land with this. And again, I'd love to hear what you think. Let's keep the conversation going. I think that the answer isn't swinging between extremes. It's not the be the girl boss who does it all, or retreat to the 1950s kitchen with your kitchen maid maker thing. The real solution is choice. Real, honest to goodness choice, supported by systems that actually make it possible. Now, if you think about it, at its core, feminism has always been about freedom, the freedom to decide what kind of life you want. If that's running a company, amazing. If that's staying home to raise kids, also amazing. If it's a mix that shifts with different seasons of your life, that is valid too. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. The problem comes when we start attaching judgment or rigid gender rules to those choices. And here's the thing. There are good parts of the tradwife vibe that we can keep if we want, right? Like celebrating family bonding, valuing caregiving, and even the art of homemaking. If you guys have seen any of the tradwife videos, they're very pleasing to watch, right? That doesn't necessarily mean I want that life for me, but I can still enjoy the vibes, right? So those things can matter, but we don't need to drag back patriarchy with them. Homemaking can be respected without being assigned only to women. So in practice, this means couples actually designing the rules that fit them. Maybe one parent stays home when the kids are little, maybe you trade off, maybe you both work flexible jobs, or maybe you are the sole breadwinner and the other is the caretaker, and that's what you decide because that's what works for you. There's no one right model, and there's no prize for living like TikTok says you should. Don't listen to TikTok. We're not here for that. But also, we can't just put all of this on individuals. We need better systems as a whole. Paid family leave, affordable childcare, flexible work. These are part of bigger conversations that we can and we quite frankly should be having. And when families have those supports, they're not forced into an all or nothing choice. The tradwife fantasy loses its shine because balance actually feels doable. And finally, we've got to be real about the fine print, okay? Behind those glossy Instagram posts is a lot of unpaid labor, financial dependence, and pressure. Women and men deserve the full picture before they sign up for any kind of lifestyle, okay? Case in point, don't take it so seriously. If you want to receive that content just as, almost as if you're reading a book or watching a movie and you're sitting back and enjoying the story and appreciating for what it is, cool. That doesn't necessarily have to be your life, again, unless you want it to be. So the bottom line here that I'll leave you with is keep the love and care that tradition romanticizes, pair it with the equality and rights that we've fought for, and make room for every woman to define success on her own terms. That's not setting us back. It's moving us forward. Thanks for hanging out. See you next time.
That's a wrap on this episode of Jeans with a Blazer. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, a mindset shift, or just the push you needed, do me a favor. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Leave a review wherever you enjoy your podcasts. It helps more people find it, and it keeps these conversations going. And I love hearing from you. Follow at Jeans with a Blazer and tag me with your biggest takeaways, your latest wins, or just tell me what topics you want to hear about next. See you next time.